Chapter 16 of Stories of Old Greece and Rome by Emily Kipp Baker. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 16 The Story of Proserpina. When Jupiter made himself ruler of the world, he imprisoned some of the warring giants under Mount Etna in Sicily, much to the disgust of Pluto, who was always fearing that when the giants got restless and turned over and over underground, thus causing earthquakes, they would some day make such a large crack in the earth that daylight would be let into Hades. So Pluto often went up out of his sunless land to look carefully over the island, and to be sure that no new fissure was being made in the earth's surface. One day, as he was driving his 4 coal-black horses through the Vale of Enna, he saw a group of maidens gathering violets on the hillside, and among them was one so exquisitely fair that Pluto determined to take her for his wife. This was Proserpina, daughter of Ceres, the goddess of agriculture, a maiden who had ever shunned the thought of marriage, and preferred to spend her life playing games and dancing in the beautiful plain of Enna, where there is never any frost or snow, but springtime lasts through all the year. Pluto had often tried to gain a wife by gentle means, but no one would consent to share his gruesome home. So, knowing that this maiden he desired would never listen to soft words of love, he determined to take her by force. Driving his fiery horses at full speed, he rushed toward the group of laughing girls, who scattered and fled at his approach. Proserpina alone stood still and stared, frightened and wondering at the grim figure confronting her, while the flowers she had gathered dropped from her trembling hands. In a moment Pluto had seized her in his strong arms, and, trampling all her violets under his ruthless feet, he sprang into the chariot and urged his horses to their full speed, hoping to reach Hades before the maiden's cries brought Ceres to the rescue. As he neared the Cyane River, the waters, wishing to befriend Proserpina, began to rise higher and higher, and, with tossing waves, opposed the madly rushing steeds. Fearing to risk the chariot in the angry waters, Pluto struck the ground with his terrible 2-pronged fork, and a great chasm opened before him, into which the ruler of Hades hurriedly plunged. Then the earth closed again over him and the captured maiden. During the dreadful moments when Proserpina felt herself held a prisoner in the arms of this bold wooer, she called wildly to her mother for help, but soon she realized that her cries would never reach Ceres's ears, and that she must find some other way to let the goddess know of her unhappy fate. So she summoned enough strength to struggle in her captor's embrace until she freed one arm from his hold, and with it loosened her girdle, which she flung into the Cyane River, just before the yawning earth hid her so completely that no traces were left to tell where she had gone. When Ceres came that evening into the Vale of Enna, and found that her daughter was not playing as usual with the other maidens, she questioned them, and learned their tearful story of the chariot with its 4 black horses and terrible driver. Just what had become of Proserpina no one could tell, so the distracted mother began her search, not knowing whether she might at any moment come upon her daughter's body mangled by the chariot wheels. For days and days she wandered, never stopping to rest except for a few hours at night when it was too dark for her to see her way. Rosy-fingered Aurora, when she left her soft couch to open the gates of the morning, and Hesperus, when he led out the stars at evening, saw her still searching for the lost Proserpina. Sometimes she was so weary that she sank down by the roadside and let the night dew drench her aching limbs. Sometimes she rested under the trees when a storm broke over her head, but even here the rain beat down upon her, and the wind blew its cold breath in her face. Kindly people gave her food whenever she stopped to ask for it, and, though none knew that she was a goddess, they sympathized with her grief when she told them that she was seeking her lost child. Only once did she meet with unkindness. She was sitting at a cottage door eating gruel from a bowl, and a lad, Stellio by name, laughed insolently at her enjoyment of the meal. To punish him for his rudeness, the goddess threw some of the gruel in his face, and immediately he was changed into a lizard. One day Ceres found herself near the city of Eleusis, and to avoid being recognized as a goddess, she disguised herself as an old beggar woman. She sat for a long time on a stone by the roadside, mourning her lost Proserpina, until a little girl came by driving some goats. Seeing the old woman's tearful face, the child stopped to ask her trouble, but before Ceres could answer, the girl's father joined her, and together they begged the stranger to come to their cottage and rest. The goddess yielded at last to their kindly insistence, and as she walked beside the old man, whose name was Celeus, he told her that at home he had a sick boy who had lately grown so ill that to day they believed he would surely die. Ceres listened to his pathetic story, and for a moment forgot her own grief. Seeing a chance to return the old man's kindness, she followed him into the cottage, but first stopped by the meadow to gather a handful of poppies. When the parents led her to the sick child's bedside, she stooped and kissed the pale little face, and immediately it became rosy with health. The boy sprang up well and strong again, to the great astonishment of his delighted family. As they sat at the simple evening meal, the goddess put some poppy juice in the glass of milk set out for the boy, and at night, when he was in a heavy sleep, she rubbed his body with oil, murmured over him a solemn charm, and was about to lay him on the red-hot ashes in the fire, that his mortal parts might be consumed and he himself be made immortal, when his mother chanced to enter the room, and springing forward with a cry of horror, snatched the boy from the fire. Before the excited mother could vent her wrath on the old woman, Ceres assumed her goddess form and quietly reproved the intruder, for her interference had not averted a harm, but had prevented a great gift from being conferred upon the unconscious child. When Ceres left the cottage of Celeus, she continued her wanderings over the earth, and finally returned, discouraged and heartbroken, to Sicily. Chancing to be near the river Cyane, she went down to the water's edge to drink, and happily discovered the girdle that Proserpina had dropped there in her flight. This made her hopeful of finding further traces of her lost daughter, so she lingered by the river bank, eagerly scanning the overflowing stream. As she stood there holding the recovered girdle in her hand, she heard a low murmuring sound as if someone was speaking in whispers. The goddess listened, wondering from what place the voice came, and soon she found that the soft tones proceeded from a fountain which was so close to her that its lightly tossed spray fell on her hand. The murmur was often indistinct, but Ceres understood enough to realize that the words were addressed to her, and that the fountain was trying to tell her how Pluto had come up from Hades and carried off Proserpina to be his wife. While the goddess was musing over this painful revelation, the fountain went on to say that it had not always been a stream in sunny Sicily, but was once a maiden named Arethusa, and a native of the country of Elis. As a follower of Diana, she had roamed the wooded hills, and one day, being wearied from the chase, she sought refreshment in the forest stream. The drooping willows hung protectingly over the water, and here the nymph bathed fearlessly, believing herself alone. But Alpheus, the river god, heard the splashing of the water, and rose from his grassy bed to see who was disturbing his noonday rest. At the sight of Arethusa he was so delighted that he ventured to approach her, but she fled terrified through the forest, calling on Diana for help. The goddess, hearing her cries, changed her into a fountain, and to further baffle the pursuing Alpheus, she wrapped it in a thick mist. As the river god could no longer see the nymph, he was about to give up the chase, when Zephyrus maliciously blew away the cloud, and Alpheus saw the bubbling fountain. Suspecting that this was Arethusa, the god changed himself into a rushing torrent, and was preparing to mingle his impetuous waves with the waters of the fountain, when the nymph again called on Diana to protect her. The goddess came to her rescue by opening a crevice in the earth, and here the shivering waters of the fountain found a speedy refuge. To keep far out of reach of Alpheus, it continued to flow underground for many miles, and even crept beneath the sea until it reached Sicily, where Diana again cleft the earth and allowed the fountain to come up into the sunlight. During her journey through the dark underworld, Arethusa said that she had seen Proserpina sitting, tearful and sad, on a throne beside the grim ruler of the dead. When she heard this story, Ceres was no longer in doubt where her lost daughter could be found, but the knowledge gave her little comfort, for she was aware how useless it would be to ask Pluto to give up the wife he had so daringly won. Seeing no hope of regaining her child, Ceres retired to a cave in the hills and paid no heed to the waiting earth that had suffered so long from her neglect. There was drought in the land, and the crops were failing for want of water. The fruit trees were drying up, and the flowers were withering on the parched hillsides. Everything cried out for the protecting care of Ceres, but the goddess stayed her hand, and in the solitude of the cave mourned unceasingly for Proserpina. Famine spread over the land, but the people, in spite of their dire need of food, burned sacrifices of sheep and oxen on the altars of Ceres, where they importuned her with their prayers. Jupiter heard their cries, and besought the goddess to take the earth again under her wise care; but Ceres refused to listen, for she was indifferent now to the welfare of man, and no longer delighted in the ripening harvest. When sickness and death followed hard upon the famine, Jupiter saw that he must save the sorely stricken land; so he promised the goddess that her daughter should be restored to her if she had eaten nothing during all her sojourn in Pluto's realm. Mercury was sent to lead Proserpina out of Hades, but when he reached there he found that Pluto had already given his wife some pomegranate seeds, hoping that she would thereby stay forever in his keeping. Dismayed at this unexpected downfall of her hopes, Ceres was about to shut herself up again in the cave, when Jupiter, on behalf of the suffering earth, made a compromise with Pluto whereby Proserpina was to spend half her time with her mother in the land of sunshine and flowers, and the rest with her husband in cold and cheerless Hades. Each spring Mercury was sent to lead Proserpina up from the underworld, lest her eyes, grown accustomed only to shadows, should be dazzled by the blinding sunlight, and she herself should lose the way. All things awaited her coming, and as soon as her foot touched the winter saddened earth, the flowers bloomed to delight her eyes, the grass sprang up to carpet her way with greenness, the birds sang to cheer her long depressed spirit, and above her the sun shone brilliantly in the blue Sicilian sky. Ceres no longer mourned, nor did she again suffer a great famine to afflict the land. The patient old earth smiled again on Proserpina's return, for then her mother gave the blighted vegetation a redoubled care. But her happiness did not make the goddess forget the kindly old man who had given her food and shelter at Eleusis, for she returned there and taught the boy Triptolemus all the secrets of agriculture. She also gave him her chariot and bade him journey everywhere, teaching the people how to plow and sow and reap, and care for their harvests. Triptolemus carried out all her instructions, and as he traveled over the country he was eagerly welcomed alike by prince and peasant until he came to Scythia, where the cruel King Lyncus would have killed him in a fit of jealous wrath had not Ceres interfered with timely aid and changed the treacherous monarch into a lynx. End of chapter 16.